Waltharius also features one of the great heroes of medieval Germanic literature, though he is here as a supporting actor rather than as the main
Uh,
character. I'm referring, of course, to Hagen, who
uh,
is perhaps arguably the protagonist of the Nibelungenlied, at least the
uh.
second half of it. What do you make of the figure of Hagen in Waltharius and in medieval Germanic tradition in
Well,
general?
obviously in Waltharius, in some ways, he's the central character because his is the central dilemma. Walterius' job is simple. You've got to defend himself. Gundaharius, again, it's simple. He wants the gold and he wants the girl. Hagen is the man with the dilemma. And in a way, of course, the result will depend on him. He is the only person capable of overcoming Walterius, but he doesn't want to. So what's he going to do? Because again, these dilemmas, I think it's pretty much the rule that in a dilemma between lord and relative, lord and family, or lord and friendship, or lord and blood brotherhood, you have to side with the lord in the end. But it's always very difficult. Um, so you get these kind of contorted situations, which and Hagano is in that way. I won't say he's a central character, but he is the if Walter is the protagonist, then Hagen is the antagonist. It is a matter between the two of them. Um, and I think that's sort of that image of him as a rather tormented character is there in the Nibelungenlied as well. He's not sure quite. I don't like to say about heroes. He's not sure. He is sure of things which point in different directions, and of course he has to make his mind up, and that's what heroism is all about.
And the final character in Voltarius to discuss is, of course, the figure of Gundaharius, who is essentially the villain of the work.
Mm, mm,
And you wrote about another reflex of Gundaharius, the figure of Gunnar in
mm.
Atlanta. What do you make of the conflicting depictions of this character?
Yes, well, I think what struck me early on was the kind of philology of it. Gunda Harius, okay, so that's Gunda Hari. So in Old English, that's Guth for Gund, and Hera, Guth Hera. And in Old Norse, it's going to be, well, um, of course, in German, it's Gunther, still a common name. Um, so I was struck by the way that the name hung on despite philological transformations. Um, having said that, it's interesting that although he appears to be a figure of fiction, he isn't, because we actually know about a king called Gundahari, who is the son of someone called a king called Gibika, and that's the man. So something of this completely disappeared, wiped out a royal dynasty. Something of that remained in the popular imagination. And you have to wonder why. And I think it's a case of another, well, perhaps another gallant defeat, which is always so much more literary than a simple victory. Perhaps, well, yeah. I know that Sidonius Apollinaris, the Latin writer down in the south of France, he complains bitterly about the Burgundians around him singing their songs. And I think it was R.W. Chambers said, how gladly would we swap the entire works of Sidonius for one of the songs sung by these 6 foot greasy butter-haired Burgundians around him. And I thought, yeah, I can go along with that. I don't mind looting Sidonius at all, but I'd really very much like to read or hear a Burgundian ballad. Um, and you imagine that Burgundian ballads there would very likely be about Gundaharius, who would be practically a figure of living memory.
Okay, Tom, you wrote a great book called Beowulf and the North before the Vikings, in which you point out the ways in which Beowulf is connected to the real history of the period it describes. Um, what would you say about Waltharius and its connections to the history of the migration period?
Yes. Well, I think that's what I've been flirting with, actually, that I keep saying it seems to me to be a confused reflection of a confused situation. Um, but something which uh, clearly has true information behind it, if we could work it out. And I think the thing that I'm missing here is that I don't have much sense, in fact, I don't have any sense of the archaeology of the place and period. If I knew more about that, then I'd have some kind of cross check on it. Because when I wrote Beowulf and the North before the Vikings, that was what inspired me. It was books like, I'm sure it's around here somewhere. Um, yeah, it's books like this one. Oh, a big, heavy book. Um, by Franz Herskend, who is the professor of archaeology at Uppsala University, indeed. And it's the pre-Carolingian Iron Age in South Scandinavia. So much of that really fits very well with Beowulf. And this really enables me to speak with its second-hand authority. But he's the authority, and I'm quite happy to take his statements. So we need a book like this, which is about, shall we say, the pre-Carolingian Iron Age in Western Europe or Southwestern Europe. But I don't know who to persuade to write the book.
Right. Well, there is clearly a connection to history in the premise of the poem, opening up with Attila conquering various groups and demanding hostages from them, which of course sets the stage for the work.
Yeah. Yes, I think what one thing one can say is that we have occasionally heroic ages. You remember Hector Munro Chadwick wrote a book called The Heroic Age, and a very good one too. But the heroic age in Western Europe is surely the 5th and 6th centuries. It's the period following the fall of the Roman Empire. And of course, to modern historians, the Roman Empire didn't really fall. It was just sort of it changed its committee structure, shall we say? Well, that's nonsense. It did fall, and the effects of that were felt all the way from Scandinavia to Spain, and that's what we are getting in works like the Waltharius.
Okay, Tom. So E.R. Curtius has a book which is known in English under the title of European Literature and the Latin Middle Ages. So we've been discussing Voltarius from really the perspective of the vernacular literature of the Germanic speaking peoples. How would you say that Voltarius relates to or illuminates the idea of a Latin Middle Ages?
Well, I don't know enough to say, but it's quite true that because of the nature of politics, there's been much more interest in early vernaculars than in Latin literature. And there's Curtius's book, and there's also F.J.E. Raby's. I've forgotten what it's called, but something like Latin literature in the Middle Ages. And there's also my good friend Jim Binns, who wrote a very provocative book called something like English Literature in the Elizabethan and Jacobean Age, which didn't mention people like Shakespeare because he thought that was just a subculture. And the real culture of the Elizabethan and Jacobean Age was in Latin, which very few scholars now can read. In fact, the knowledge of Latin has really collapsed, I could say. That's one reason I'm glad to have Waltarius is it means I can practice my Latin a bit, which needs it at the moment, which always needed it. But even me, with my long ago 65-year-old ordinary level pass, in the certificate examinations, I find myself correcting people who've got graduate degrees in classical studies. That shouldn't happen. What could I say? Yeah, I feel there's a whole. We just don't know very much. The likes of you and me no longer know very much about a whole panorama of literature now fading from memory. And I
Oh,
just
I
actually
agree.
say, I said F.J.E. Raby is a major figure, and his son lives up the road in the big house there. I'm going to call on him and say, I very much admired your father's work, in particular his article Philomela Praevia Temporis Amoini, which is about nightingales. Um, yeah.
Now, when we think about the connections between Waltharius and the vernacular Germanic literature of the early medieval period, one of the connections has to be the theme of treasure and the fights over getting treasure, the resistance to give it away, uh,
Mm.
and the meaning attached to treasure by people in it. What do you
Yeah.
think of that?
Well, I think going back to the fall of Rome, I think that this had very profound effect on the prestige culture. The prestige culture depended on circulating, rings and torques and necklaces and bracelets and stuff like that, treasure. But at some point, and this is archaeological, the stuff stopped being transferred. And so the North went into a kind of gold drought, um, which meant that actually the gold acquired a kind of almost mystic quality because they hadn't got any anymore, and there wasn't any sign of anything coming. So that created a kind of halo about it. Um, and that I think again that's probably connected with politics, and I think the probable reason is that the Merovingian kings managed to block off the trade route so that materials were no longer transferable, and that must have caused. And of course, that has an echo in Beowulf, where it says that ever since then the favor of the Merovingian has not been given to us. No, of course it hasn't. But my question is this: did the famous raid of Higelac back there in the 6th century, was that actually perhaps caused by a dearth of treasure? If you need treasure and you haven't got any, what do? You go and take it from the people who've got it, especially if they're holding out on you. Um, I just wonder, the Beowulf seems to think that Higelac provoked trouble with the Merovingians, but possibly the Merovingians provoked trouble with Higelac. Um, but all that I think is illuminated by the major changes in politics and in economics, which we don't actually understand very well. Well, this is the latest production of Uppsala Books. It's the Latin poem of Waltharius, an epic about Walter of Aquitaine, and it's translated by Brian Murdoch and edited by Leonard Nydorf. A very striking poem in itself. It's a book I've always wanted to have and never had the chance to buy. So I'm really pleased that I've got it at last, and I can strongly recommend it to anyone who's interested in Beowulf or in the history of the post-Roman period or the whole development of the Hunnish and Gothic period. So if you want to know anything about those kinds of things, this will tell you something. And it's a good read as well. So strongly recommended.